Hey guys, enter the stars. And I'm starting a little early tonight because I want to give a little background about our very special guest that we have tonight. Now, all of this started when we were investigating the rights of infants, newborns, and the type of screening that they undergo when we all come into this world. And what I was curious to understand was that much of the screening is standardized around the world, at least in the developed countries, where they're actually running a DNA test on all of our children when we're born into this world, starting in the 1960s. This is real. It's not conspiracy. We're going to share some facts with you. And then we're going to bring Twyla Brace into the show because as we were researching this in Wikipedia, we came across her name. I reached out to her in Twitter, and she has agreed to come on the show tonight and talk to us about her fight for the rights of your children. So this is a very special show. I see this woman as a hero in her efforts to stand against the machine, to stand against legislation going back to the 1960s that has given up your rights as an infant from the time you're born. Now, we're going to go ahead and bring her in on Skype in a few minutes here, but I want to talk to you about the background of what happened and what went on. In Ireland, a controversy emerged in 2012 whereby a number of hospitals retained heel prick test cards and thereby a DNA database with over 1 million samples from 1984 without consent or notification of the parents. What this resulted in was a 10-year rolling destruction cycle that they introduced. And there are similar practices in the UK, New Zealand, and several states in the United States. The heel prick test is the newborn screening. And what they do is they collect your infant's blood, and then they do tests on it. Some countries, there's been controversy over the collection and storage of blood or DNA samples by government agencies during routine newborn blood screen. And it was revealed that in Texas, the state had collected and stored blood and DNA samples on millions of newborns without the parents' knowledge or consent. These samples were then used for genetic and to set up a database to catalog all of the samples of the newborns. Samples obtained without parents' consent were destroyed. Now, all of this that I'm saying can be looked up. It's right there out on the web for all to see. Now, what else we found is that certain patient advocacy groups, which we're going to bring in Twyla Brace in a minute here, and she's going to tell us about her patient advocacy group and her fight. We're going to learn exactly the type of experiments that they are doing with our children's DNA information without our knowledge. She's going to have all that information for us. And that's what we're going to take a look at tonight. Now, Twyla is the president of the Minnesota-based activist group. She's voiced concerns over the storage of blood spots and is a strong proponent of having all biobanks destroyed. Biobanks are the places where they're holding all this genetic information. She cited concerns over government-sponsored genetic research. And it is worth noting that states have been storing samples since the 1960s, and each state has its own policy on the storage and research. So depending on what state you live in, that's the only way you're going to know what the policies are of how this information is used. Now, we won't probably get too much into the targeted individual subject. I'm not sure how comfortable Twyla is with that. So we're just going to kind of ask her a few questions that I've outlined and just kind of let her run with it so we can get all the information that we can. Now, as of 2008, California has stored 12,000 samples since 1980, while Texas destroys the sample within months. We just talked about how Texas was busted and they had to implement this rolling destruction cycle. Problem is a lot of this information is stored digitally. And then what happens is it's never destroyed completely. It's somewhere on some server. And with the ability of these servers to hold massive amounts of information, somewhere our privacy is being eroded. Now, they've even had some situations where Homeland Security was given this genetic information. And we'll probably do a follow-up show talking about, targeted individuals and how this could play into that based on our conversation with Twyla tonight, because she's probably going to give us a lot of information. It's going to help us in the search for what exactly is going on. So appreciate you guys that made it out tonight. I'm going to go ahead and give her a call, bring her in.
Hello, it's Twyla again. That was unfortunate.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Hey, it happens. Yeah, it actually happens a lot back when we first started YouTube, when we were trying to work out all the bugs with this. Yeah, and the mute button's really hard to find. I think it's a YouTube thing, actually, to be honest with you. They need to automatically mute when you're doing a live show. That way people don't have to worry about it. But yeah, I gave you a brief introduction, and maybe you can help fill in some of the blanks as to your background, maybe, and how you came about getting in the fight of fighting for our children. I guess we could start there.
Sure. Our organization, Citizens Council for Health Freedom, has long been interested in privacy since 1996, which was a year after we began. And we realized that one of the things that we say about privacy is he who holds the data makes the rules. So we know that everybody who wants access to our data wants that access because that is how they are able to secure some power over us. They're able to profile, they're able to know about us. When it comes to the information they can get on our doctors, they're able to control our doctors through payment and through looking at that data. So we've been doing it for quite a long time. And in 2003, here in Minnesota, which is where our organization is located, we're a national organization, but this is where our office is. We noticed some Minnesota legislation that had to do with newborn screening, and the commissioner of health here wanted to be able to screen any child for any condition in the future without having to come back to the legislature and seek permission. And we opposed that legislation, sort of looking forward into the possibility of what that could mean, and into DNA and into genetic testing, etc. In the process of that conversation, the health department let it slip that they had been keeping the test results of all of these children since 1986, but then they also let it slip that they'd been keeping the cards. And so they had been keeping the cards since 1997, and that's when we first realized, we knew about newborn screening, but that's the first time that we realized that they were warehousing the blood of the children. And it didn't take us too long to decide to call this baby DNA so that parents would really understand what was taking place here. It's really state warehousing of the DNA of newborns at birth. And that is something that they cannot do to an adult. The government cannot take the DNA of an adult without getting their permission, unless they're being, unless you're a criminal, or you're probably considered to be a criminal.
Right. Well, that's pretty fascinating, because what that represents is the ultimate invasion of privacy before we've even had a chance to have an opinion or rights on it as a newborn. And so that's a huge problem. So this started in Minnesota, where you live, of course, and basically you decided to get involved because you were involved in politics, or is this something you just picked up when you saw the problem that existed?
Well, I think because we had been so involved in privacy, then realizing that this was all about genetic privacy. But over time, so we discovered this in 2003, but we also, as we learned more and more about the issue, and we're really the only organization working on this issue to stop this. But as we discovered more and more about it, we realized that there were some states who had been, saving it longer than Minnesota had been saving it. But in the process, we initially, anyway, we thought we were the only state that this was just a Minnesota problem. We knew that it was much more than a Minnesota problem when I think it was 3 years later, we called on Governor Tim Pawlenty to destroy the warehouse, to throw away all the DNA that had been taken without parent consent and that was taken on all of these children. And we got a phone call from a reporter at the Austin Statesman in Texas, who said as a result of our press release, which she had seen, she decided to investigate Texas. And at that point discovered that Texas had been keeping the DNA since 2002. Wow. So by that time, 4 years of DNA had been collected. And that's when we knew, oh, this was maybe not happening just in Minnesota. And indeed, that is the case.
Right. So this is statewide. Now, do you have any proof that this is coming down from the federal government onto the states to require them to store these samples?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think what happened is, and I know this is how it happened in Minnesota, I think they looked at the DNA and saw people who are supporters of this call this a national treasure.
Wow.
The DNA of every newborn is considered a national treasure in their minds. But in 1997, when they decided to start storing the DNA, they also sent blood spots for research to the CDC. And I'm not exactly sure which one happened first. Did the CDC ask, or did they decide to start storing them? It's not clear to me, but I do believe that there are other states that were storing them before 1997. Wow. So I don't believe it's the federal government does not mandate this, but they particularly with the Newborn Screening Reauthorization Act of 2014, it certainly encourages states to store the DNA of the children.
Right, and in the fact that the CDC was working in conjunction with the states for whatever they were doing with it, that kind of alludes to the possibility that they were working together as well. Now, what specifics do you have with regards to what they're doing with these newborns' information? So in other words, what kind of genetic experiments do we have proof that they're performing?
So there's two different kinds of research. There's research that is external to the state government. So just, let me just say, just to begin here, because I don't know exactly what you said in the introduction, but I think for your listeners, at least I should say something before I get into that question.
Sure.
Because some of your listeners may not understand even what newborn screening is or how the process works. And so I think as a rudimentary beginning, I think that would be useful.
Yes.
So what happens at birth, and in almost every state, there is a newborn screening law. And some of the laws allow parents to opt out for religious purposes. Some allow them to opt out for any reason. Nebraska does not allow them to opt out for any reason, and in fact will take the child from the parents to make sure the newborn screening is done. But newborn screening is supposed to happen within the first 24 to 48 hours of the birth of the child. What usually happens is that a nurse or a lab technician come in, they prick the heel of the newborn, and they begin to squeeze drops of blood onto a paper or a card. This card typically has 3 to 5 spots of filter paper, and the blood is dripped onto the filter paper. Information on the mother and the child is included on that card, and then that card is shipped to the state health department and the state or to the contractor for the state. Most states have a public health department within the Department of Health, and that's who does the newborn screening. But there are several states who either contract with another state health department, like Oregon does newborn screening for, I think, for Oregon and Hawaii and another state or two. And up in the New England area, there is a newborn screening sort of cooperative where it's all done in one place.
Okay.
So that's what happens, and it gets sent out of the hospital. The labs don't do anything with it. It's all done by the state or by the contractor for the state. And most parents don't even know it happened and don't know what newborn screening is. But it's important to understand that newborn screening is actually newborn genetic testing done by the state government without the consent of the parents.
That's just unbelievable. That just blows me away. So they know exactly who we are now with all of the advances in genetic testing. In other words, profiling, insurance ramifications, propensity to disease, cloning. There's a possibility of cloning that comes into this.
I should maybe just limit a little bit here.
Sure.
So newborn screening is genetic testing. But it doesn't look into the DNA except for the cystic fibrosis. So what it does is it looks for analytes and metabolites that are shed or put into the bloodstream as a result of the genetic condition. So it does genetic testing for a limited number of tests or a limited number of conditions, and there is controversy over how far that should be expanded. Should it just be for newborn conditions? Should it be for newborn and childhood conditions? Or should it be for newborn, childhood, and adult onset conditions? And so right now, newborn screening is typically just for conditions that appear at birth, except for cystic fibrosis. And cystic fibrosis tends to come when the child is a toddler or a little bit older. And to confirm that the child has cystic fibrosis, they will actually then go into the DNA to confirm the diagnosis. But for most newborn screening, the DNA is not actually accessed. But of course, the DNA itself is what the blood is. And we have heard from people who are part of this, proponents of this, that after 6 months, that blood specimen is no longer good for anything except the DNA. Okay. So for the first 6 months, they can do the newborn screening with the limited amount, and they can recheck it if they want. But then the analytes and the metabolites start to degrade, and all that's really left is the DNA.
I see. Got it. And to this point, the legislation prevents them from doing anything more than cystic fibrosis genetic testing. But as the laws loosen up, they have those stored. And as more genetic testing is allowed, they can go back into those samples and do them in the future if the legislation permits it, right?
Well, in fact, the federal government in September 2013, gave out $25 million in grants to 4 institutions to do a pilot project of sequencing children at birth. So that would lay out the entire DNA, the entire blueprint, the entire genetic blueprint of the child. And I understand from some news articles about it that while parents might initially think, oh yeah, that's a great idea, they have had a hard time getting very many of those parents to actually do it. And so one of the reasons is that the parents are concerned about the privacy, and they're concerned about the use of the information. And, parents are very rightly concerned. And that was, in Minnesota, that was why when we heard that the commissioner wanted to, be able to test the children for any condition without coming back to the legislature, that's what we foresaw was the possibility of complete sequencing of the children.
Wow. So you mentioned that Texas...
Oh, by the way, that is with parent permission. This particular pilot project is with parent permission, just so you know.
Okay, great. Now, you had mentioned that Texas was storing millions of samples. Now, are they involved in some kind of rotating destruction cycle of those samples?
Yes. So after that article got into the Austin Statesman, and actually there were 2 more follow-up articles, it led to lawsuits. And so parents sued, and that's the result of, that's the reason why the destruction happened. So 5.2 million baby DNA cards were destroyed in the middle of the night, several months after the judge ruled in favor of the parents. And then the law was changed. So the law now allows the DNA to be stored for 2 years unless it's the DNA of a child for whom they have found something. So let's just say they found cystic fibrosis, or they found PKU, or they found something. Then those blood samples are kept indefinitely. But other than that, the blood samples are destroyed every 2 years. But there's nothing prohibiting, as we read the legislation, there's nothing prohibiting the blood spots from being used for at least internal research by the department as opposed to external. Internal research by the department for those 2 years.
I see. So would you say that Texas was the biggest offender of the amount that was stored, or were there other states that were more egregious?
So the reason Texas has had so many stored is because Texas does newborn screening twice on every newborn, and because Texas is a very large state. So in that small period of time, they had so many samples.
I see.
Let me just a second here. Indiana has kept their blood spot cards for 23 years. They, according to a television reporter's report, they have 666 banker boxes full of newborn DNA. And as a result of one of our press releases, when Minnesota destroyed, because we had a lawsuit here too, they found in favor of the parents. When Minnesota destroyed the 1.2 or 1.4 million cards here in Minnesota, we put out a press release. The Indiana reporter did some investigation in Indiana, found 23 years worth of DNA storage, 666 banker boxes, and a change in policy, not legislation, but just protocol from the government. So the government decided that they would keep those 23 years, those 666 banker boxes, make them available to researchers without consent, and allow parents, and now of course adult children, to opt out of the research and have their DNA destroyed. Of course, most parents and most young adults, children who had it done and who are now adults, most of them have no idea it ever even happened, so they're not going to opt out. So this is a huge resource for researchers. And going into the future, they are going to get consent from the parents before they store and use the DNA.
Okay. So a lot of these government tests that are being done, are they happening before the 2-year lifespan of the sample, or are they happening later?
The actual newborn testing, that's at the 24 to 48 hours, but the research using the DNA, it's really dependent on the state. Michigan, for instance, they have a biobank, they store it, and they limit the type of research that can be done. And I just like to say that there's external research and there's internal research. So the department themselves doing research, doing test development, building new things that the child could be screened for, that's actually research too, something that we have long pointed out, as opposed to giving it away to some outside entity to conduct research on it. And so that kind of research is happening at different levels, at different amounts of time in different states. And we do have a list on our special website. Our special website is itsmydna.org.
Okay.
And there is a list of how long the 50 states hold the DNA of children. And I think we've been doing it since 2000, back to 2001. So every year we update it. But some states who used to keep it indefinitely, they don't keep it indefinitely anymore, but we're not certain what they're doing with the DNA that they kept indefinitely. Right. Is it just the new blood spots that they're not keeping? That's not entirely clear.
Now, as a citizen, can we request that our hospital destroy any DNA that they have collected on these cards?
So once the DNA is collected on the cards, and I will say that most hospitals will never look at that as DNA. So if you come to the hospital and you say the DNA on the cards, they'll think you're crazy, but that's what it ends up to be. So the hospitals collect it, but they immediately send it to the health departments. So parents have to go to the health departments and ask for their card back. Now, again, it depends on the state. There are some states that only keep it for 3 months or for 2 months or for 6 months. It really shouldn't be kept any longer than 6 months, because you can't do newborn screening after 6 months, and then it becomes useful for a completely different purpose than it was collected.
Right.
So it really does depend on your state. So there's no need to ask for it to be gotten rid of if it's going to be destroyed. But for those states, and there's a whole bunch of them, I could do a little list for you. There are some that keep it 3 years, some that keep it 5 years, but there's those that keep it indefinitely, or I should say from 10 years to indefinitely, and one interesting one that keeps it for more than 2 years. We don't have any idea how much longer than 2 years. But if your listeners are in these states, California, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, and Washington, those are states that keep it longer. And again, for Texas, it's only certain ones that they keep longer. And then Ohio is the one that keeps it for longer than 2 years, but we don't know how much longer.
Wow, that's interesting.
But the list again is on our website.
Okay, great. I just dropped both your websites in our chat. We've got close to 100 people watching tonight. That's great. And this video will be shared. Website cchfreedom.org. I put that in the chat, as well as the other site that you said. That's in the chat as well.
Mydna.org.
It's mydna.org. Thank you. Couple other questions I wanted to ask you with regards to the immediate destruction before the card's sent to the health department. Can the mother request that in her birth plan if she does not want? I guess it's law that it actually is tested, but before the health department picks it up, can a mother request that it's destroyed?
So there is absolutely no reason to do newborn screening if you don't want it sent to the health department. The hospital does none of the testing.
Oh.
This is all a government program. So we encourage parents who want to have their child screened, especially for things like PKU or certain illnesses where the child can get ill in a very short period of time. It can be really devastating. It doesn't happen to very many babies at all, but if you want to just, make sure that that doesn't happen and you actually have the testing, why not get it done privately? So there is one place called PerkinElmer, and if you go to our itsmydna.org website, then there is a 10-point overview, and point number 10 is where it talks about private screening. And in that case, most people who do private screening, they contact PerkinElmer in advance, and they bring the blood collection kit to the hospital. Then the blood is put on the kit for private screening, and then the mom or the dad send the kit off to PerkinElmer, which then sends them back the results of the screening.
That sounds like a better option for people that want to protect the rights of their infant. Go through the private route versus the public route.
Right. Yes, I encourage it. I will say that it's very good to be prepared. We did have a mother in New Jersey who was trying to have the doctor use the private kit, and the doctor and the hospital was completely refusing to do so. So it would be great in advance of getting to that point. The mother had just discovered the storage of the DNA just a day or even less before she went to the hospital. So she didn't have time to talk to her doctor to put it into a plan. It was all a surprise for the hospital, and they didn't want to be any part of it.
Wow.
So it's very good to know in advance and to make that planning and to make your request known.
Absolutely. Now, someone in the chat had asked a couple of questions. Where in general are these biobanks? Are they near hospitals, or where are these places?
So again, They are within the departments of health because the hospital has nothing to do with the screening.
Right.
They are only the ones that prick the baby's heel, put it on the card, and then they ship it off. They don't do any of the testing themselves. And so it is wherever the health department stores them.
I see.
It could be in the department or it could be with their contractor.
I see. Got it. And how about your recent efforts in the fight to defend the rights of our children? What's have you been up to lately, like within the last year?
In the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Reauthorization Act of 2014, we worked with members of Congress to get language protecting the genetic privacy of children into that bill.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, what the language said was as soon as the federal research rule got published, that protection against research without parent consent would go away. And that's because we understood that the federal government had promised the members of Congress that they would incorporate the language of the law into the new rule. It wasn't the way that we wanted to do it because law is stronger than rules. And so for the last 2 years, we've been trying to make sure that that language got into the federal research rule. Well, the federal research rule was finalized like the 2 days before the inauguration of President Trump. And it did not incorporate our language from the law. What it said instead was that the language from the law was now repealed. So we have a bit of a battle on that end, and at the state level, we would like parents to go to legislators and say, you know, we want to have parent consent over the storage and the use of our children's DNA. And if you have kept any of it, we would like it to be destroyed because otherwise we're going to file a lawsuit. And we do have an attorney who may be interested in taking lawsuits of parents whose DNA has been kept. So that's one thing, is we're trying to do that at the state level. And at the federal level, we would also like to get the new Congress, once they get past some of this brand new stuff, to actually put that language back into law and not have it go away. The researchers, the state health departments, the data industry, none of them would be happy with that. But we believe that parents have a right to protect their children and their children's genetic privacy. And we believe that children are just newborn citizens. They will grow up to be adults who do not know that their DNA is stored and owned by the federal government, because whatever the government stores, it typically considers that it has ownership of it.
Right, exactly. Now, based on some of the research that I've done, this is happening worldwide. I guess in Ireland, there was a controversy in 2012 where a number of hospitals were retaining the heel prick test cards and thereby the DNA database with over 1 million samples from 1984 without the consent or notification of the parents. Have you heard anything internationally about this, or do you tend to focus on here nationally?
We focus on nationally for our engagement because there's plenty of work here to get the country that is supposed to be all about freedom and rights to actually do the right thing. And, you know, the problem with this issue is that for the most part, nobody, until 2003 and our discovery, nobody knew it was even happening. Parents do not know this is happening, so they don't even know they don't know that they should protect their children because they don't know that their children's genetic privacy has been taken from them or their DNA ownership has been taken from them. They don't know, right? So if you don't know, then you don't rise up and fight because you don't know. And so we have been working just here, but we are well aware of the storage of DNA around the world. But here in America is where we're supposed to have constitutional rights, the Fourth Amendment, against this kind of infringement. And yet it's happening right under our noses here, and we're trying to correct it.
Wow. Now, this is kind of an off-topic question, but my viewers were curious as to what your experience has been with Rh negative blood Now, in and amongst the free thinkers, there seems to be a lot of ramifications associated with Rh negative blood. And we're wondering if you have any clues or tidbits regarding the collection of the DNA from infants and how it might relate to Rh negative blood. And if there's no connection, that's okay to say too. But is there anything on the top of your head that jumps out at you when I say newborn infant screening and Rh negative blood?
No, not specifically. I mean, I know I'm a registered nurse, right? So I know the problem when a Rh negative mother has an Rh positive baby,
Right.
and but I don't know of anything specific. The only thing that I can say is I don't think we know the extent to which outsiders who have access to this information might want to use it for various purposes, whatever those purposes might be. And, you can easily, once you have the DNA, you can easily find out what the Rh factors of the blood. And if somebody's interested in that, either for research or for other reasons, it certainly can be part of it. But I have never heard anything specific to DNA storage, newborn DNA storage, and Rh negative blood.
Okay, great. That's a great answer. Wow. I view you, Twyla, as a hero for standing up, because it's not a popular road to go down, and to stand up for an infant that has really no power in this world and stand behind these parents is very commendable. And that's what we stand for on this channel, is the rights of free thought and protection of our privacy and rights in this country. And so I'm just really glad you came on the show. I think you answered most of the questions that everybody had. I just want to give you a minute to talk about anything you want to, or plug your sites or anything you want to say at this point.
So again, I would encourage people to go to itsmydna.org. I will say that one thing that I did not say about the newborn sequencing, and even maybe how this DNA could be used in the future, right? But the DNA sequencing of the newborns is being done of the child. So parents are indeed being asked, but one of our questions that we have wondered about is, are the parents being asked this question before they sign up for the program? What will your child, when they are an adult at age 18, think about the government sequencing them when they had no opportunity to say if they wanted to be sequenced? Because any child that is sequenced at birth has lost their genetic privacy. Now, that information that happens during newborn screening, it's kept in two places. It's kept as a part of the government record because the government did it. But they also send that information to the parents, to the child's medical record. So it becomes part of the child's medical record. We have had parents call us who did not know that newborn screening ever happened, because many parents, studies will show that parents are often in a fog when their baby is, when the mother's in labor and after the delivery, and everybody's exhausted and it's just crazy in the hospital. It's a brand new routine. Everybody's tired. They're just following orders, right? And it's all a fog. And so parents don't understand that it happened. And we've had parents call us who are perturbed when the health department calls them and says something's wrong with your baby. And they don't even know why the government would know that anything about their baby, let alone something being wrong. And they were never asked whether the government could be involved with their child. As far as they were concerned, they were in the hospital. They didn't understand how on earth the government could have gotten this information, because they don't understand that newborn screening is government genetic testing.
Right.
As I said, at a limited basis. But anyway, so I think there's a lot of things that people don't even understand. Another thing to know about newborn screening is the more conditions they test for, the more likely it is for parents to be told that something is wrong with their child. They're called false positives. So it's not true, but because there's more and more conditions tested, the test will come out saying there's something wrong. And then the parent is told to go to the hospital or wherever and be retested. And then it'll come out as negative. So there's nothing wrong with their child. But studies show that parents tend to believe the first news. that was the one that was so emotional for them because something was wrong with their brand new child. And they don't necessarily believe the second news. They don't believe the reassurance. One study called this the collateral damage of newborn screening.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things to think about with newborn screening. There's a lot of reasons why we say it should be done privately. We would like parents to be able to pick and choose what conditions they want the child tested for. We would like the government no longer doing this. As a result of the government doing this, doctors don't even talk to parents about it, which is one of the reasons lots of parents don't even know it's happening. And then, of course, we do not want the government to store the DNA or to have the ability to use it or give it away like Texas bartered for it, used it for barter, and 4 other states gave it to the U.S. military without parents asking. So there are a lot of things happening in this kind of secret issue. I think, parents are just clueless and they haven't really been given the opportunity to know what's happening, and it doesn't happen like that with really anything else.
Wow. U.S. military. So do you have any more details on what they wanted that for?
Yep, and your listeners can look it up with the Texas Tribune is the one who broke the story. And they found that the U.S. military asked for the DNA of children who were, I think, Black and Hispanic as a part of creating an RNA database. So a particular database that they wanted for national security purposes.
Wow. That's huge. So, and that's all the details we have on that, really, is basically what you just said.
You can probably find more. I have not ever heard that there was a lawsuit about this particular finding. There was a lawsuit on Texas using the DNA for barter. And there have been, as a result of our efforts on this issue, more states have given parents more rights on the DNA, or they've limited how long they keep it, or they'll allow parents to ask for the cards. But still, for the most part, because it is state law, although lots of parents can opt out of it, there's lots of states that allow you to opt out if you even know that you can. But as a result of it being part of state law, most parents still are clueless that it's even happening, and so they're not looking, they're not thinking about it. They know nothing. They can't even protect their child because they don't even know.
Right. Now, I have a personal experience in a prenatal test. My daughter was, it was a false positive for Down syndrome. I think it was about 4 months into the pregnancy. And we considered abortion at that time. I was 21 years old. And because of a false positive. And luckily, they redid the test. It was done at the wrong time. She was born perfectly fine, very intelligent. There's nothing wrong with her. But it just goes to show you that some of this testing isn't very accurate.
Yes, what the study about the collateral damage found is that parents who had received bad news the first time around before the retest, and they didn't believe the retest results, they would do things like separate emotionally from their child, just thinking that this condition was going to emerge and the child was going to die. Or they would change the eating habits of the child long beyond when the condition would have emerged. So, maybe the condition always emerges by 6 months, but, 2 years later, they're still treating the child with this same diet, or they're keeping the child away from other children. So they did all sorts of things. They were not, I can't remember what the percentages of it. It wasn't every parent, but enough parents in this study to cause concern did not believe the retest result, and
Wow.
that was harming children
Now,
and relationships.
Now, what is the turnaround time when the sample leaves the hospital, goes to the health department, and is tested? Is this a rapid test, or is it 3 weeks, 6 weeks?
No. It's a rapid test because there are some conditions, serious PKU. So there's a lot of children that might have a trait of something. This is something a parent called us perturbed about, was that the testing only showed a trait. The trait was going to be in their medical record forever. The mother wanted to get it out of there. I said there was no way to get it out of there. But so there are traits, and then there are serious conditions. So for some of the really serious conditions, the damage to the child can happen within a day or within a week. So there is definitely they want to get it back within at least 5 days at the minimum. Even quicker than that would be the preference. And there was a story out of Wisconsin, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I could be off on that, but where it talked about the delayed testing results, long delays. And so that is not what they want. They really want it to be a rapid test.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because there are conditions that if they don't treat them or identify them quickly, the child could die. So that's the whole purpose of the screener, or at least that's what they tell us. And there are a lot of benefits. There are a lot of child's lives that are saved. The problem we're talking about here is the storage of it and the using of it for testings, additional testing outside of the consent of the parent and the child.
Right. Yep. The research, the use. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And the one thing, for anybody who takes the time to look at our 10 points, I would encourage, I can't remember which, but this one researcher did a focus group with parents, and the parents told her things like, this must be illegal. They had no idea that this was happening, and they were positively sure that what was going on had to be illegal. And as a matter of fact, our call to Governor Tim Pawlenty to destroy the stored DNA of all these children, that was, some would say it wasn't unlawfully, but they certainly had no law. They just made an executive decision as a department. So, oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with that comment. Yeah, never mind. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So what was the state that was collecting the RNA samples for government use? Was that Texas?
No, there were 4 states that gave DNA to the federal government, the military, to create an RNA database.
I see, military RNA database. Okay, I'm just taking some notes here, because after you go, we're going to continue to research this live for those of you that are tuned into the show, and just dig a little deeper into this story. Now, do you remember who broke the story?
Oh, I know now what I was going to say.
Okay, go ahead.
As a result of us calling for Tim Pawlenty to destroy this, a researcher in, I believe, Michigan by the name of Beth Tarini wrote an article. Well, she did a study. And then she wrote an article from her study, and she titled it, "Not Without My Permission." And what she discovered is that parents were, most of them had no idea about the storage and use. And more parents were willing to have it stored, but it was something like 72% of parents totally against research without their consent, like research on their child without their consent. And it wasn't just general blanket research either. If they were going to allow research, they wanted to allow the specific research. So they just didn't want to say, yeah, you can do research on my child. They wanted to say, okay, I'll approve that study, but I won't approve this study. So very specific, very protective. So if parents have the opportunity to know what's happening and have the power to stop them, there will be far less of this kind of research and use taking place. Oh, I knew I wanted to say one other thing.
Sure.
One researcher at Mayo, I think it was, said that basically what they learn from the DNA, about 40% of what they learn is about the mother. And mothers don't realize this, but because of how DNA is structured, and you get part of it from your mom and part of it from your dad, that really there's a lot that is learned about the mother by doing the genetic testing on the child. Wow.
So it's not just an invasion of the child's rights, it's also the mother as well. And if they realize that, it could help them in the decision process of what to allow and what not to allow.
Well, how do you mean that?
The mother standing up for the rights of the child, knowing that her own rights are being violated.
I see.
Yeah,
That's
but her genetic information being shared.
true.
So thanks for that. And so back to the government using the DNA for RNA sequencing. Who broke that story? What newspaper? It was a Tribune, I think you said?
It was the Texas Tribune.
Okay.
And the Texas Tribune also broke the story on the bartering.
Okay.
And the bartering and the sale of the DNA. They were actually giving blood spots to PerkinElmer, which is where you can get your private testing. But they were giving blood spots to PerkinElmer, and PerkinElmer was giving the Texas Department of Health equipment, brand new newborn screening equipment for their lab.
Wow. That's unbelievable. All right. So we're going to get into that after we let you go. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us, Twyla? I really appreciate you coming on the show.
We have these little business card size, little wallet cards and we hand them out. We have some people that get these cards regularly, and they just hand them out to any mother who's pregnant. So I would just encourage your listeners, you could just email us at info, I-N-F-O, at cchfreedom.org. And if you want, cards, like 10 cards to hand out to pregnant women in your state, we really know that this is a secret issue, that parents know nothing about it, and unless they are informed, particularly if they're pregnant, beforehand, then there's people all around the country concerned about the issue, to hand out the card and let parents know.
That's a great idea, taking back control of our rights. Well, Twyla, I really appreciate having you on the show. As I said, I feel like you're a hero. Gosh, if you've got any updates, you've got my Skype address. If there's any developments that happen in the legislation, just reach out to me and we can have you on the show an additional time if you'd like.
Well, that would sound great. I'm happy to do that. I did think of one other thing that your listeners could do, and that is to, when they look at their state and they find out how long their state keeps the child's DNA, this is a perfect opportunity to tell legislators that the law needs to be changed.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? That would be a wonderful thing to do.
Right.
And yes, I will reach out to you if there's any new developments.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating show. You're probably one of our best guests. People are really interested in this because as the digital era, materializes and gains traction, more and more controls and additional things and violations of our privacy are going to manifest. And anything that we can do to protect ourselves is going to help people and empower them. So thanks again for coming on the show, and you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Casey.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
All right, you guys, that was a great show. Asked as many questions as I could. Hopefully we did the interview justice. I am looking for this story so that we can share this with you guys about the DNA being turned over to the federal government, to the military. And I think that was probably the highlight in which Twyla shared this with us. Now I'm going to share a screen in a minute here, and we'll go ahead and dig deeper into this because I think that I found something. Let's take a look here. Let's go ahead and share screens with you guys. Leaked by the Texas Tribune, and where they were actually requesting samples from Black and Hispanic children under the guise of national security. Fascinating. So let's see if we can find this here. Let's see here. Gosh, my computer almost crashed. It did that buzzing sound while we were live with Twyla. And so that was a close call. let's see here. DSHS, Department of Homeland Security, DNA deception, Texas Tribune. When they were sued last year for storing baby blood samples without parental consent, Texas health officials said they'd done it for medical research. They never said they turned over the blood spots to the federal government to help build a vast DNA database. So here it is, right here. Texas Tribune review of 9 years worth of emails and internal documents on the Department of State Health Services newborn blood screening program, released after the state settled the case so quickly that it never reached the discovery phase, shows an effort to limit the public's knowledge of the program. So here we have a secret program. This broke in February 22nd, 2010, when the state health officials were sued last year for storing infant blood samples without parent consent. They said it was for the medical research into birth defects, childhood cancer, and environmental toxins. That's interesting because when you do, this was, let's see, where was this? This was in Texas. They said they never said they were turning over hundreds of dried blood samples to the federal government to help build a vast DNA database, a forensics tool designed to identify missing persons and crack cold cases. A Texas Tribune review of 9 years' worth of emails and internal documents on the Department of State Health Services newborn blood screening program reveals the transfer of hundreds of infant blood spots to an armed forces lab to build a national and someday international mitochondrial DNA registry. This should be front page truth or news, you guys. The only way this is going to get out is if you share this video. The records released after the state agreed in December to destroy more than 5 million infant blood spots also shows an effort to limit the public's knowledge of aspects of the newborn blood program. So they were trying to do a cover-up, and they were trying to manage the debate around it. But the plaintiffs who filed the lawsuit never saw them because the state settled the case so quickly that it never reached the discovery phase. During the discovery phase of the trials, you guys, that is when the gloves come off and everything is revealed. They did not want it to go to the discovery phase because all this would have been public knowledge. DSHS spokeswoman Carrie Williams said that while the department's general philosophy was to save blood spots for public health research, we did not have an exclusive policy. Okay, so do you remember during the show when we asked Twyla about the states working with the federal government? Well, here's a prime example of that happening. And who knows how many more were happening without our knowledge. She says DSHS participated in the project because officials believed it would help in missing persons cases. To me, that sounds like a cover story. And knew the blood spots could not be linked back to a particular individual. That's a lie. Our understanding of mtDNA is that it's not used to pinpoint exactly who a person is, but can help determine origins. Williams said, our intentions were good ones. But Jim Harrington, the civil rights attorney who filed the blood spot lawsuit last year on behalf of 5 Texas parents, believes the DSHS meant to deceive the public. When he was negotiating with state officials, he said he specifically asked what research the blood spots were being used for, and there was no mention of the federal project. He says he was stunned by how quickly the state settled the lawsuit. Sometimes there are slam dunk cases, but I'd never seen this kind of case settle without discovery, says Harrington, director of Texas Civil Rights Project. This explains the mystery of why they gave up so fast. For decades, the state has screened newborns for a variety of birth defects, breaking their heels and collecting 5 drops of blood on a paper card. Isn't it weird, the 5 drops? Wonder if that has any numerical significance. Until 2002, the cards were thrown out after a short storage period, but starting that year, the state health department began storing blood spots indefinitely for research into causes of selected diseases. 4 years later, DSHS began contracting with Texas A&M's University School of Rural Public Health to warehouse the cards, which were accumulating at a rate of 800,000 a year. State health officials never notified parents of the changes. They didn't need consent for the birth defecting screening, so they didn't ask for it for research purposes. The agency's rationale was that it let parents who asked opt out of the newborn blood screening and de-identified all the samples before shipping them off. De-identified the samples. Interesting. Over the last several years, researchers have requested Texas baby blood spots for a variety of medical projects. A variety of medical projects. Let me go back in the chat, make sure we're still connected here. This is simply unbelievable. To study the gene involved in clubfoot, to inspect the DNA of infants who develop childhood cancer, to examine prenatal lead exposure. Those are the projects state health officials have touted repeatedly before lawmakers and critics. But the least publicized of these research projects is arguably the most interesting. Here it is. Between 2003 and 2007, the state gave 800 de-identified blood samples to Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory to help create a national, let's look this up, Adult Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. We'll research that after we're done with this article, you guys. In Wikipedia, let's see what this says. Just open up that tab and be ready. mtDNA is extremely valuable in forensics because it's easier to find. Do you see the inconsistencies in the story? They're saying that the blood samples were stored for missing persons, but then on the other hand, they're saying that they've been de-identified. So what use are they for missing persons if they've been de-identified? You see. mtDNA is extremely valuable in forensics because it's easier to find and extract from human cells than nuclear DNA. MT stands for mitochondrial. In addition to blood, it can be identified in hair, bones, teeth, and damaged or degraded biological samples, and can be used to identify victims of mass disasters or to solve long since cold criminal cases, but it's only as valuable as its sample size. Armed Forces Identification Laboratory scientists, in conjunction with the research branch of the Justice Department, approached Texas in a $1.9 million effort to expand the country's database, the DNA database, part of the president's DNA initiative launched under George Bush. I told you guys that Texas was at the crosshairs of much of what is manifesting now in this reality. Texas is in the crosshairs. This is another example. We had Roe v. Wade passed in Texas. We had the first case of Ebola in American soil in Texas. We have this secret government research project into your children's DNA in Texas. What is it about Texas that is going on? We will get to the bottom of it, you guys. Wanted anonymous and maternally unrelated blood samples from Texas Caucasians, African Americans, and Asians, and from Hispanics and Native Americans in particular. Hispanic and Native Americans in particular. What kind of Nazi experiments were these people doing in the military? Why does the military have our children's DNA? It says to round out their genetic record. Why do they have to have a genetic record? Why does the military have to have a genetic record? Yeah, I hope you guys are understanding the severity of what's going on here. This is huge, okay? Researchers also took samples from prison populations and infant blood screening in other states, including Florida, Minnesota, and California. They did not pay Texas for the samples. Eventually, research proposals indicate federal officials hope to be able to share this data worldwide. For international law enforcement, an investigation in the context of homeland security and anti-terrorism efforts. This is what they're saying as to why they did this. International law enforcement investigation in context of homeland security and anti-terrorism efforts. Black children, or was it African American children? What are they trying to wage some kind of genocide on certain groups based on these blood samples? Like, what is this about? Whether Texas officials were concerned about the perception of the project or simply didn't think it was newsworthy, they never mentioned it. In presentations and public reports and emails sent to reporters as recently as last year, state health officials never brought up the federal project, even when they discussed the merits of roughly 24 medical research projects designed to unlock the causes of childhood disorders like autism and diabetes. In November, when Texas Tribune first filed an open records request with the DSHS to review blood spot records, the agency said the information requested was confidential. 2 weeks later, when the lawsuit settlement was formally signed, the Tribune asked again, and this time the agency relented. But the box of documents officials turned over hardly referenced the mtDNA project. Hardly referenced it at all. Aside from a single email referencing a U.S. Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, and Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. When the Tribune pressed health officials about the missing research files, they produced them. So they tried to give them the information without giving them the stuff that mattered. They let one slip by, which tipped them off. They asked for the additional files, and they received them. They said it was an oversight. The documents had been overlooked in their initial search. The records the agency initially released paint a portrait of an agency that walked on eggshells around the baby blood spot collection from 2001, when lawmakers first debated whether to warehouse the cards, through last year when they passed a law in response to the civil rights lawsuit, giving parents better options to opt out. Unbelievable. I'll continue to dig in here. I don't want to read this whole article and beat you guys to death with it. Let me put the link in the description or in the chat. If you guys have additional questions, you can look and reference that article. Everybody, please hit the thumbs up button on this. This is probably one of our best shows in terms of information and exposing the enemy for what they do. The world needs to see this. Tweet it, share it, do everything that you can. This is the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. Let's look at Wikipedia and see what this is all about. Laboratory specializing in DNA profiling. Okay, so they're doing DNA profiling, the federal government, using American citizens for terrorism. What are they calling terrorism? Is this about profiling someone based on our bloodlines? They're pretty much saying that, you guys. They're identifying homegrown terrorists based on our bloodlines. That's what they're saying here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be collecting DNA from Caucasian, Asian, and Black and Native American children of America. We're not terrorists, but this is what they're saying. There's something in the blood. And maybe we all awaken to it at a certain point in our lives, realize our potential, and this is what they're afraid of. It says here, it appears to be part of the United States Army Medical Research and Material Command. They store refrigerated DNA samples from all current active duty and reserve personnel. So once you join the military, they get your DNA. However, almost all casualty identifications are affected using fingerprints for military ID card records. So the cover for this organization is that they're storing the DNA to identify dead soldiers, right? But we just saw an example of them receiving regular citizens' DNA from Texas. Okay, that had nothing to do with the military. So we have caught them in another lie. Cover story, truth. All right, you guys, shocked more people didn't come out to see this shocking information, but that's the way YouTube goes, right? Seems like the real stuff kind of gets buried under the rug, and the stuff that really matters that can make a change kind of falls to the bottom, right? And I have my suspicions that YouTube is having something to do with all this. But we're going to carry on. We're going to get the information out there. Hopefully this video goes viral so you guys can understand and the world can understand what's really going on and find the truth and raise awareness to some of this stuff that's going on with our newborns losing their rights, as well as parents and the military's involvement in all of this. Much love to you guys. I guess I'll pop in the chat here for a little bit. Let's see. Victoria says the blue bloods. Jay-Z talks about it exactly. Copper-based blood. They need our DNA to create viruses to kill us, says Yolanda. Possible. I'm a positive too, female J. Appreciate you too, Presley. Much love to you guys. And keep sharing. I know you guys do all that you can. I know that there's some algorithms keeping this channel and information on here from reaching the mainstream. But just do what you can to get the information out there. Hopefully I'm going to focus on having more guests like Twyla on the show. I think that went really well. And we'll do what we can to stand up for our rights. All right, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Have a great evening. Take care and be safe, you guys.